What does it feel like to be a psychic? How does the process work in your mind?
I have a good answer on that. I would give everything away if I could have my own life, and if I could switch it off. My gift, it is always there. There is a mind and a subconscious mind. Sometimes many people will say, hey, I was here before. I sure was here before. We have no explanation for it. Or sometimes even you, that you think, oh, somebody called. Oh, that's him. You can call it coincidence. It's not coincidence anymore. If I talk about 15 years ago about ESP, nobody wouldn't believe it. So we didn't scratch the surface what we can do with the mind. We only use about 1.5% with the mind. That's all that we do. There's a mind and a subconscious mind.
Well, when you are having a psychic impression, what does it feel like in your mind? What does it feel like to you?
Well, let me put it this way. When I work in a murder case, I forget everything. I even don't think about my family or my father or mother. I don't work that way. When I have an object, clothing means nothing to you. But I sit quiet and like a staring field, like a TV screen. And I see the picture. And I take the clothing in my hands and I go to the place. I make a mental picture. Let me put it this way. When I ask you, here is a pencil and a piece of paper. Would you draw your home? And you take a paper and you're going to draw your home. Living upstairs, you draw your home in your area. What are you doing, sir? You make a mental picture, right? Mm-hmm. So, when I go to a crime, there is always a mental picture. I will prove it to you. When you see an accident on a road, on a crossroad, where 5 people are killed, a terrible accident, and you leave that place, and you come back 2 years later, and you stay on that stop sign where you have to stop, and you will say, oh my gosh, yes, I remember the place. And what are you doing? You make a mental picture in your mind. What about a radar? A radar is done by tubes. And I would see 600 miles away. Now, how you explain that? When you take a pigeon, a pigeon, you bring up his little puppy, and you let him fly, and you take him 300 miles with you, he will find his home back. In other words, we even didn't sketch the surface what we can do with the mind. So it is not an electric impulse at all. It is things that we don't know yet. Everybody has psychic phenomena. You can take it or leave it, but it's true. Even animals has it. Want more and more people going to believe in psychic phenomena. It is a shame that the government is not putting up the money and opening a research foundation in psychic phenomena and test everybody what claim to be psychic. Russia is doing it. Russia is 10 steps farther in psychic phenomena as we are today.
Why is your psychic gift so much more powerful than ordinary people's gifts?
I never had a gift before. I was a house painter, and I was in China for 9 years. I came back in 1939, and then the war broke out in 1940, the 10th of May in Holland. We were fighting the Germans for 6 days, and then we gave up. We couldn't hold them. So after the occupation, my father had a small painting business. And I was not the man that sit still and live on my mother and father's lap. So my father said, well, you can help me with painting. So I was the house painter. So he put me on the roof on a 46 feet high ladder. And I put to paint windows and a part of the roof. Now I'm 6 feet 3 and I put the ladder right in the middle. And I painted on both sides that I can move that heavy ladder. And I hang over too much, and I fell down, and I was unconscious for 3 days, and I was a different man when I came out conscious. If I could switch out my gift and enjoy life, I only sleep 4 or 5 hours a day, but I cannot get it out of my mind. I get up with it and I sleep with it. That's the story.
Craig Carpenter is the most important messenger among traditional American Indian leaders for the past 20 years. He is an Iroquois, and he grew up with his family in Michigan. Craig claims that he's not any more than a messenger, but I have talked to a number of people who have been healed by Craig And I know that as a prophet, he told Tom Laughlin, the creator and star of Billy Jack, exactly what would happen for the 3 years of unbelievably hellish problems that Laughlin faced in bringing Billy Jack to the screen.
Traditional Indians remember the original instructions left with them, instructions which they promised faithfully to fulfill, instructions regarding 4 main points: a given land area that was set aside for each original or traditional nation, a language that was entrusted to each original or traditional nation, certain foods, and each traditional nation that I know of has at least one food unique to that nation only. And the 4th thing that was given or entrusted to each traditional nation was a way of life which included the rituals and ceremonies by which they could contact and work consciously with the unseen guardians of this land and life. Okay, what are some of the things I've seen or know of historically? I was present in a Ford Victoria 2-door sedan when a Hawaiian miracle worker, with his sacred prayer, which is in the form of a chant, made that car go up the hill about 400 yards, and which perhaps saved our lives because we were snowbound on a hill south of Flagstaff trying to get down to Sedona and Oak Creek Canyon. Other cars that tried to make that hill couldn't. They were either slid off in the ditch or were parked in the road itself. A pickup truck coming from the opposite direction, coming downhill, with chains on. We didn't have chains. And a load of rocks in the back was sliding all over the road. He didn't even have adequate control. We had no way of getting up that hill at all without miracle power. There were no other alternatives. The snowplows weren't coming. We didn't know what was going to happen. During this experience, the Hawaiian chanting and these very powerful spirits coming in, the general sitting behind the steering wheel was almost in convulsions. I began to fear for him. I didn't know what was happening. And especially when the car started to move ahead up the hill, because the general had already placed it in park. It had automatic transmission. He had the emergency brake on, and he had the engine running to keep the heater going so we'd keep warm in there. And yet, in spite of all that, the car was sliding uphill, going uphill, and it wasn't until the car started moving at about 12 miles an hour, I should judge, almost as fast as I can run, that the general realized, finding what was going on, he released the emergency brake and shifted out of park and started stepping on the accelerator to make the wheels spin. But that didn't make any difference. We just kept going the same speed anyhow. So I saw that, and what does a Ford Victoria 2-door sedan weigh? 2-3 tons? I don't know. One man chanting. That's one thing I saw. This great Spirit's life plan basically talks about the life of paradise that we would have here as long as we followed those original instructions. We'd have this paradise condition here, which we did have. All the explorers I've read, from Christopher Columbus himself in the American tropics of 1492 up through William Stephenson and the American Arctic of 1914-1918, all point out that the new territories, the virgin territories they discovered, were a paradise peopled by saints. Columbus said that the Indians he found were better Christians than the Christians themselves, for instance. This paradise condition did exist. We are convinced this paradise condition will return after this great purification day. We had to go through a period of 4 days, which turned out to be 400 years, testing and temptation and tribulation, to see if we really understood our original instructions and if we could live up to them, no matter what happened. And this, I guess, was our final examination period for this era. Then, of course, Purification Day comes upon us, which up till 20 years ago we thought would happen in one day. I mean, one literal sun. Now we see that it's a period of time, and it may take 10 years or 100 years, whatever. The God's sense of time is far different than we mortals.
And here is some of Craig's evidence that Purification Day is coming on us now.
There's a primitive or original type of spinning wheel, which is simply a shaft with a flywheel on it. And during the wintertime, Hopis, and others too for that matter, but Hopis in particular, because these are the ones that remembered the teachings in greater detail than anybody else that I know of. The basic instructions were given to all of us, all of the original nations here, some 400 of them in North America alone. But each nation was given certain details or ramifications of it. And when we came together in these last days, as the prophecy said that we should and would, then we can fit these various details together and see the complete picture. And we find from this that Hopis had the most complete picture of all. All right? As they would spin in the wintertime, they would tell stories. And among these stories, we find a chain of prophecies centered on this spindle. And they said, you know, someday, just before Purification Day, we'll see objects or machines rolling across the ground on round things like this, referring to the little flywheel, the spindle whorl, on round things like this with animals pulling it. And that's the time to get ready for the great testing and trial and tribulation, because it'll soon be upon us. Then after a while, you'll see these machines rolling across the ground with nothing pulling them. These self-propelled machines will get to going so fast and become so popular that they will build special trails for them. And these trails will cut the land all up like a cobweb. And when they use the phrase, cut the land up, right away the listener knows that that's bad, evil from the destroyer, because that's one of the things we promised not to do, was to cut the land up. It's a gross violation of Creator's law in order to cut up the land, especially to buy and sell it. Land is here for the purpose of producing and sustaining life. It's not to be a commodity of merchandise or to get rich off of. It would cut the land up like a cobweb, these different trails. And there'd be two main types of trails. One type would be two strips of metal. And if you stand on it and look down it, these parallel strips of metal look like they come together way off there. But they don't really come together, it just looks that way. And over that trail, these machines would be tied one behind the other, and from a distance it would look like a great caterpillar or snake growing across the land. And in those machines, or in that machine, there would be whole villages of people moving. The other type of trail would be smooth and oftentimes black. It would look almost like rivers going out there. In fact, if you stand on this type of trail and look down it, oftentimes it'll look like water out there ahead of you. It won't really be water, it'll just look that way. All right, these trails would get so numerous, they'd cut the land all up like a cobweb. Then somebody would invent a roadway in the sky. And you begin to see these machines floating overhead. And eventually, those floating machines would become so perfected that you would see whole villages of people floating overhead. Now, how that Great Spirit knew in that early day that someday there'd be a main transcontinental air route between Los Angeles and Chicago that would go directly over the Hopi villages, I don't know. But I do know that if he planted those villages 10 miles farther to the south, or perhaps 10 miles farther to the north, they wouldn't have seen these villages of people floating overhead. And I can see now how that prophecy has been fulfilled. Now, at that time then, somebody would invent a gourd full of ashes. And here they held their hands to show about how big that gourd full of ashes would be. Later on, I found out that the interior of an atomic bomb, the actual working parts, take away the shielding, it's just about that size. A gourd full of ashes, which, if it was ever dropped from this roadway in the sky, and it hit the earth, it would boil the water and burn the land and leave ashes over a wide area where nothing would grow for many years. And if that ever happened, that was to be the signal for certain Hopi leaders to stand up and begin declaring their message to the world. The message up to that time consisted partly of these original teachings, which were to be kept secret with the different clans and secret societies, each clan or secret society fulfilling its mission, and if it was fulfilled properly, the results would prove of benefit to all the other clans and secret societies in the nation, among other nations of this great land, and its influences would reach from coast to coast.
Satan is to us a symbol rather than an anthropomorphic being, although many members of the Church of Satan who are mystically inclined would prefer to think of Satan in a very real anthropomorphic way. Of course, we do not discourage this because we realize that to many individuals a picture, a well-wrought picture of their mentor or their tutelary divinity is very important for them to conceptualize ritualistically. However, Satan symbolically is the teacher, the informer of the whys and the wherefores of the world. And in answer to those who would label us devil worshippers or be very quick to assume us to be Satan worshippers, I must say that Satan demands study, not worship, in its truest symbology. We do not grovel, we do not get down on our knees, genuflect, and worship Satan. We do not plead, we do not implore that Satan give us what we wish. We feel that anyone who is going to be blessed by any god of his choice is going to have to show that God that he is capable of taking care of the blessings that are received. The Church of Satan is an organization which is comprised of Satanists who, because of their abilities and lifestyles, and I must stress this, lifestyles, reflect a higher than average human potential. Through this avenue, the Church of Satan, the Satanist will become the prototype for a more rational, certainly more finely tuned society. The stress has been on nude altars. The nude altar is an integral part of the satanic service, and with good reason. The nude altar represents man's fleshly heritage, the very earth, the mother, the womb from whence he came. And we feel that there's nothing bawdy, there's nothing licentious, nothing lewd about the nude who is employed for an altar, the nude woman. We also feel that there's nothing wrong with bawdiness, with licentiousness, or with any type of sexual activity, but we feel as though the ritual chamber is no place for it either overtly or covertly. And there's no need to be surreptitious in our ritual, insofar as sexual predilections are concerned. Now, for centuries, both churchmen and laymen have been defining the devil according to their needs, all the while playing the game of muzzling the enemy. They've been inventing the rules of how devils should behave, how Satanists should behave, how devil worshippers should act. And they have been in an authoritative position to do this, because naturally they are the men of God, they are the men of the church. Supposedly they are the men who've been doing battle with this devil and been absolving their parishioners of these devil's promptings. In this manner have they maintained a convenient means by which to escape the blame for their inadequacies or indiscretions. The devil made me do it has long been a stock alibi. Once it held very firm. Now, fortunately for us, it has become ludicrous to say the devil made me do it. Yet many, while laughing, still play the old game of self-deceit and blame the devil in one way or another. So the old game is still going on. This is made amply clear in, of all places, the very world of the occult. Witches, who held the devil's name for centuries, now refute Satanism with a passion, employing it as the other side of the fence, which they are most certainly not. All manner of occultists, from ESP researchers to faith healers, denounce Satanists as worthless, meaningless, dangerous, ad nauseum. But never is there to be found a positive adjective about Satanists. We Satanists only smile at such transparencies because they are transparent opinions. Their motivations are most clear. It shows that even those who now claim emancipation from inquisitors need devils themselves in order to make their art more palatable to others. Ironically, the masters of the world have always been Satanists. The masters of magic have always practiced satanic magic. That is to say, magic without the trappings of self-deceit, because self-deceit is always an inhibiting factor in the ultimate success of a magical rite. The great devil's advocates of the past, Friedrich Nietzsche, Mark Twain, Herbert Spencer, H.G. Wells, Shaw, Pierce, all of them, they were able to hold a looking glass up to man, but man, momentarily viewing his self-deceit upon reading the works of these people, could quickly avert his gaze and find solace in his spurious rule books. The time for an organization of devils was not yet ready when these devil's advocates existed. For only a strong, organized movement could force the mirror of self-revealing before the world's eyes and hold it there. And this is what we wish to do. Hold that mirror up. It has been said that the most powerful thing in the world is an idea whose time has come round. The idea that the enemy might conceivably have something worthwhile to say is now with us. In fact, is that demon within each of us really an enemy, as we have so long been taught? Or will it be recognized as the guiding spirit of enlightenment that it really is? We must remember the word daemon. does not imply evil, but simply a guiding spirit, a motivating spirit. Man must quit kidding himself. Only when he emancipates himself from dubious interpretations of good and evil, when he truly can rise above good and evil, beyond good and evil, realizing that these terms are probably the most relative terms in man's existence. When he can accept the long, obscene name of Satan, because that is a dirty word, Satan. The occult world seems to find it even more so. When he can accept this word, this name, into his vocabulary as a sound to be honored, then he will be free. Until then, he will walk in fear of the very scapegoat he has created, and his potential guide will remain his nemesis.
And how would Satanism help you to rise to a higher mental level?
Satanism allows us to recognize and to realize our own potential. This is what I would call the balance factor. To realize that man is not created equal, that each according to his own opportunity, natural ability, must make the most of what he has, but he must also realize that he can't force cards into his computer that will not be programmed, that will be rejected. And he must, as a Satanist, knowing this, realizing what his human potential is, eventually, and here is one of the essential points of Satanism, attain his own Godhead in accordance with his own potential. Therefore, each man, each woman is a god or goddess in Satanism, but must never make the mistake of assuming that there may not be another god or another goddess next door that may be a little stronger than he or she. We feel that Satanism is a religion of life rather than death. I can't understand why some of our detractors seem so impelled or compelled to establish Satanism as a religion of death, because nothing could be further from the truth. Satanism believes that we should live this life to the fullest, get every drop of enjoyment from this life. We believe this is the best of all known possible worlds, and if there's a better one, then it will be Satanists or satanically inspired scientists who find it. And we feel that life is the great indulgence, and death is the great abstinence. I've made this very clear in the Satanic Bible, and yet there are still many who will say Satanism is death worship. So you might say this is a gateway to new and more vigorous life for the individual who might be struggling under the burden of depression. The greatest misconception about Satanists is the human sacrifice thing. They seem to overlook the fact that a curse can be thrown without any blood being shed on the part of the magician and or a victim that the magician would choose. The Satanist accepts human life as a very precious thing, albeit wasted on some individuals. And we feel that there is nothing inherently wrong with anyone who just lives and allows others to live according to their own dictates. But nevertheless, curses have to be thrown. A curse is a symbolic act. This means that it gives vent to one's anger, one's emotions, and if it is directed properly towards the victim then suffers accordingly. This is the power of ceremonial magic.
It's quite wonderful to get to know these composers as people, and it is, of course, a great privilege. Chopin is not at all like I might have thought he would be. He's not melancholy at all. He's quite light-hearted. His conversation is bantering, and he often teases and makes little jokes. He's a very quick worker. He works far more quickly than any of the other composers. And I've also found that he's very considerate. If he's been working with me and we've got, say, 2 pages of music written out, and then he finds my concentration is waning because I'm getting tired, he winds the piece of music off quickly, so it isn't left incomplete. But then sometime later, this can be weeks or months later, he'll come along and say, well, now I'll give you the rest of such and such a piece of music. And he'll give me quite a number of bars, perhaps 2 or 3 dozen bars, but instead of this being added to the end of the music, he tells me exactly where it has to be inserted in the music. I've also found that Schubert is a very delightful person, very lovable, very modest still, and quite a gay sort of person. And he communicates very smoothly and quietly. I think Schubert is the only one of the composers who sometimes alters music just after he's given it to me. We'll be working away and suddenly he will say, stop, I don't like those last 2 bars, cross them out and I'll give you something else. All the other composers seem to have the music prepared before they bring it to me, but it's as if Schubert is still composing the music as he actually gives it to me. I remember when he dictated Moment Musical, after he completed it, I wondered what other people would think of it. And Liszt stepped forward and he said, that piece of music is both excellent and exquisite. And I found that a number of people agree with Liszt. I was delighted to find Liszt so generous in his praise of another composer's music, which I understand is typical of this great soul. When Liszt first began to communicate music to me at length, he used to do so by guiding my hands over the pianoforte keyboard, rather in the same manner as automatic writing is performed. But he has changed his method now, and he usually dictates music note by note, in the same way as some of the other composers. He usually speaks in excellent English, which I think he's practiced a great deal since leaving our world, but when excited he lapses into German. Sometimes he uses French. I can usually see Liszt quite clearly whilst he's communicating, although there are times when I hear his voice but cannot see him at all. When he offered to transmit Grubelei to me, in the presence of 3 British Broadcasting Corporation officials, I felt his presence in the room at first. Then he appeared very clearly before me, looking very calm. He gave this piece of music by the process of dictation, and it was some weeks before I could play it passably well after having been given tuition by him. This turned out to be rather complicated for me to follow, as the key signature contains 6 sharps, and the time signature is 5/4 in one hand against 3/2 in the other. I was alarmed to find him attempting to communicate a piece of such a tricky nature, which appeared on paper to be disjointed. I asked him why he did not choose something more spectacular, such as a new Hungarian Rhapsody, which I thought would make a greater impression on the BBC officials. But he replied, with a little smile, that he thought the music he was giving to me would be far more impressive to them than a Hungarian Rhapsody. After I had taken down about 2 dozen bars from him, I wanted to hear what the music sounded like. On paper it appeared to me rather strange-looking, with accidentals thrown in apparently indiscriminately, strange-looking chords. So I turned to the BBC officials and asked whether they would mind if I tried to play it over. But alas, I found I couldn't play it because I couldn't get the right rhythm. I found it quite impossible to cope with 5/4 against 3/2. One of the BBC officials then offered to play it through, and he sat down at the piano, played what we'd got so far. Then he sat back, gazing at the manuscript in front of him, and there was a hush for a few seconds, and I wondered whether he was going to say, well, I don't think much of that. But he turned round to me very slowly and said, Mrs. Brown, I think you've got something here. You can imagine how relieved I was to know that the music Liszt was dictating was actually something considered quite valuable. At first, I didn't care very much for Grubelei, but now it's grown on me, as some pieces of music can, and I think perhaps it's one of the most beautiful pieces that Liszt has ever dictated to me or given to me. He must by now have communicated some 200 pieces of pianoforte music of various types, Hungarian rhapsodies, very complicated pieces which are difficult to play, and some which are not so difficult but are perhaps quite enchanting to listen to. But I think of all the pieces he's given me, this one is the most precious to me, especially as he so kindly communicated it in front of witnesses.